The end of the world began with a single drop of water lifted from beneath 3,760 meters of Antarctic ice. Outside the triple-layered portholes of the North 4 laboratory module, the polar night pressed down on the continent with a weight that felt almost physical. Here, in the heart of eastern Antarctica, the idea of cold had lost its household meaning and become an absolute law of the universe. Wind at 35 meters per second slammed into the Kevlar composite skin of the station like a living thing gone mad with rage. The whole structure groaned and shivered along every rib like a submarine crushed under impossible depth. But inside, the air was sterile, hollow, almost surgical. It smelled of heated plastic, instant coffee, and the long, sour edge of sleeplessness. Adrian Vale, head of the scientific team, removed his glasses and rubbed his burning eyelids. His eyes felt full of grit. He had been on shift for 18 hours, but he could not leave. Across the monitors in front of him crawled endless hypnotic telemetry graphs, drilling fluid pressure, torque, winding temperature, cable strain. Every pixel on those screens had cost years of preparation, and more money than most institutes would see in a lifetime. He glanced at the photo taped to the edge of the main monitor. It showed his daughter when she had been 7, before his first long expedition. She was 12 now and studying marine biology in St. Petersburg. He had missed everything. First steps, school plays, the ordinary miracles of childhood. All for this point on the map, the one place where the force lines of his theory converged, the theory that had made comfortable academics laugh in their warm offices. Gideon Shaw, the drill master, came over the speaker in a rough bass that sounded like stone sliding over stone. Depth 3,760 meters. We are steady. Thermadrill 132 is nominal. Bottom temperature -2. Adrian pressed the switch. Copy that, Gideon. Cut penetration speed to 0.5 meters an hour. We are coming up on the boundary layer. If we punch through the lens at full pace, the pressure differential will shear the well and we lose 5 years of work. Understood, 0.5 meters. The air lock behind him hissed open and released a cloud of frost, and a man in a massive Arctic field suit with the GeoCorps insignia on the chest. Marcus Hale, project curator from Moscow, had arrived 3 hours earlier aboard a heavy transport helicopter that had barely managed to land on the cleared strip in almost zero visibility. He pulled back his hood and revealed a shaved head, a wind-cut face, and eyes that looked as if they had learned long ago to treat human warmth as an unnecessary luxury. "Well, Adrian," he said, unzipping the suit and pulling a flat tablet from an inner pocket, "Moscow is getting nervous. The satellites are picking up ice movement. We have a 48-hour window. After that, the platform gets torn apart by a fault. Where is my result?" Adrian slowly turned in his chair. In the hush of the control room, the server fan sounded absurdly loud. "We got the result 3 years ago, Marcus, when Orion 25 crossed this square. You did read the reports, did you not, or do you only read the budget sheets?" Marcus flinched but said nothing. Adrian looked not at him but through him. Gravimetric anomaly. The satellites recorded a deviation in the local gravity vector that geology cannot explain. There is no buried ridge beneath us, no iron deposit, no magma chamber. There is a void under the ice, but it is a void with structure. We scanned the sheet with ground radar. Do you know what we saw in the returns? Not chaotic reflections from bedrock. Right angles. Linear features running for kilometers. "Nature does not make straight lines," Marcus muttered, taking a seat on the edge of a desk. "Exactly. Then we brought in the Yenisei seismic vibrators and hammered every meter of this ice cap. The reflected signal showed a cavity of roughly 300 cubic kilometers, an almost perfect lens. And inside it, an object polluting the magnetic spectrum so badly that approaching pilots reported their compasses spinning. We are not just drilling through ice. We are knocking on the door of a bunker, and according to the thermal survey, something down there is warm. Some energy source that has been running, without refueling, for millions of years. That is why I am here, Marcus said. If it is a reactor, I need to know. If it is a weapon, I need to be first to secure it. Adrian had never liked him. Marcus was a creature of the system, hard, practical, the kind of man for whom science existed only as a line in a budget that needed to be converted into geopolitical leverage. We are drilling through ice that is 500,000 years old to reach water that is 30 million years old, Adrian said. Haste is not a virtue here. This is a lake beneath the shield, a time capsule. A time capsule full of money, Marcus said, leaning closer to the screens. Rare earth elements, unique bacteria for pharmaceutical firms, new data for continental shelf claims. I need something I can put in front of the president. You will get your core and your water. I hope there is more than water. The Americans did not shut down their Antarctic program for nothing. We hear they found anomalies too. They shut it down because their drill head melted, Adrian said quietly. They hit a thermal barrier at 2 kilometers. We did not go at the ice head-on. We went with chemistry. He nodded toward the screen displaying the drilling fluid composition. Freon and kerosene with anti-freeze inhibitors. A needle through cloth. But if my calculations are wrong and the pressure below is more than 400 atmospheres, this whole place gets spat out of the ice like a cork from a champagne bottle. Marcus took out a cigarette, remembered where he was, and put it away again with an irritated gesture. Are you afraid, Adrian? I am terrified, Adrian said, and there was no bravado in it. Any sane person would be. You think about titles and reports. I think about the fact that the biological isolation of that lake is older than humanity as a species. To whatever ecosystem lives down there, we are aliens. Violent, dirty aliens. We are the masters of this planet, Marcus said. Plague bacteria think that too, Adrian said. The floor trembled so slightly that at first it could have been imagination. Then a yellow light snapped on above the main console. The low mechanical hum that had become the station's own heartbeat shifted into a higher, tighter whine. The coffee mug on the desk slid toward the edge. Red warning panels lit up one after another. Gideon shouted over the grinding of metal. Load spike on the cutter. We lost support. The tool dropped. Strain gauges, Adrian barked, lunging for the main console. Through the roof, cable tension is pegged. Winches screaming, something is pulling us down, suction effect. His fingers flew across the keyboard, calling up emergency protocols. Gideon, bring the compensators online. Raise bore pressure to 380. Balance the differential. On it, valves open. The station jolted hard enough that Marcus had to grab a bolted rack. Somewhere below, hydraulics hissed alive. The automatic system announced in its dead, flat voice. Contact with fluid. Depth 3762. External temperature error. What error? Marcus demanded over his shoulder. The sensor reads +20, Adrian whispered. Beneath 3 kilometers of ice, it is reading a summer day. Seal the wellhead, he ordered into the microphone. Gideon, isolate the bottom. Inflate the packer. Do not let kerosene into the lens or the sample is ruined. Packer is set, seal at 100%, sampler. The pause that followed felt longer than his career. Sampler full, Gideon said at last. Transfer lock closed, tool is coming up. Adrian exhaled. In his eyes a dangerous light had already begun to burn. We got it. Water from the age when Antarctica began to freeze. 2 hours later, a titanium sample canister furred with frost stood inside the sterile box of the main lab. Adrian worked through manipulator gloves. Behind the armored glass, Marcus watched every movement. Gideon sat in the corner on a folding stool, cradling tea in an iron mug, his face gray with fatigue. External inspection, Adrian dictated for the record. Fluid is transparent, no visible particulates. No suspension, beginning spectral analysis. Graphs flared across the screen. He frowned. What is it? Marcus asked. Salinity is almost 0. This is essentially distilled water. In nature that does not happen. There are always dissolved minerals. Here the purity is perfect. He fed a drop into the electron microscope. The image changed. In darkness floated a sparse field of tiny luminous points. Bacteria, Gideon asked, leaning forward. We will see. Adrian increased the magnification. The room fell quiet. Only the servos of the instrument hummed. On the screen were not bacteria. Suspended in the water were perfect geometric structures, dodecahedrons, regular 12-sided forms made of translucent material, each holding a weak blue pulse at its center. They did not drift like living cells. They hung in fixed relation to one another, as if maintaining a crystalline lattice in liquid. Ice crystals, Marcus said, uncertain now. No, not at +20. An ice is hexagonal. These are dodecahedral. Adrian ran a mass spectrum on one shell fragment after scoring it with a microprobe. The result came up in red: carbon, silicon, osmium-187, and traces of an unknown polymer. Look at the ultraviolet shift, he said, pointing with a stylus. This is not ordinary carbon. It is an allotrope close to lonstellate but formed into a perfect nanotube lattice. That structure should only appear after a meteor impact or a nuclear detonation, and here it has been folded deliberately. And this silicon is not sand. It is monocrystal grade, doped on the atomic scale. Do you understand what that means? Every one of these things is a semiconductor, not an organism. A processor. His hands shook as he removed the manipulator gloves. On the thermal camera, tiny heat pulses flickered from one dodecahedron to another. They are exchanging signals. We did not scoop water, Marcus. We scooped a fragment of a computing network, a liquid computer. Marcus' voice turned flat. Are you telling me this is artificial? There is no other honest word for it. Adrian cut one sphere open with a micro laser. The moment the shell cracked, the DNA analyzer tied into the system began to wail. Nucleic acid detected, Adrian shouted over the alarm. Chains, DNA, but not like ours. The sequence scrolled onto the screen. A familiar double helix, but threaded through with repeating blocks the computer could not classify. Every few hundred bases there was a marker sequence built around heavy metal atoms, iridium or something close to it. Not mutation, engineering. Markers for what? Marcus asked, stepping into the lab and breaking protocol without caring. Information. Adrian began typing commands. Translate the unknown sequences into binary. Use the heavy metal markers as delimiters. Rows of zeros and ones poured across the monitor. There were far too many for any genetic message. It was data. Compressed, layered, immense, terabytes in a single drop. This lake is not a lake, Adrian said. It is a server room. Cold, shielded from radiation and tectonics. A storage vault left here in the Paleogene. By whom? Gideon asked. By whoever modeled the Earth biosphere, Adrian said. Or by whoever left a black box before walking away. The decoder found a compression scheme. The binary flow halted and reassembled into an image, not a photograph but a three-dimensional map. The solar system floated above the lab bench. Mars was blue and shrouded in ocean. Earth was green, without polar caps, with the oceans 100 meters higher than in the modern age. Red lines connected the third and fourth planets, fine strands of traffic. The image zoomed. Around the equator of ancient Earth hung orbital rings, delicate bands wrapping the planet. Elevators rose from the surface, dozens of them, and along them moved cargo in a constant stream. They were hauling resources, Gideon whispered. Not resources, Adrian said, reading the translated spectral labels that the software now attached to the moving freight. Nitrogen, water, noble gases, atmosphere and hydrosphere. They were drying one world to feed another. A flash crossed the display. A huge asteroid slammed into the region of modern Yucatan. Chicxulub, Marcus said, 66 million years ago. No, Adrian said, colder than the screen light. Look at the trajectory. It corrected course. That was not a random impact. It was a kinetic strike, demolition of obsolete infrastructure before the next phase of a project. His breath came shallow now. This is a report on the conservation of Earth, dated roughly 34 million years ago. Then a symbol began to blink over what would one day be Siberia. Adrian increased the scale. The symbol matched the dodecahedral geometry in the sample. Next to it, the system displayed coordinates and translated parameters. A depot, Marcus guessed, a base. Primary terraforming object, Adrian read from the linguistic model, or biomass processing plant. Depth, 20 kilometers, preserved. All three men turned when Gideon, who had gone to the porthole, spoke in a voice that was almost calm. You might want to look at the ice. Outside, under the station floodlights, the wellhead they had sealed was no longer dark. A thin, almost delicate beam of blue light rose from it into the low Antarctic sky. It was the same blue that pulsed inside the dodecahedra. We activated a beacon, Adrian said. Breaking the capsule must have compromised the storage system. The signal went out. To where, Marcus asked. Automatic systems do not know the meaning of time. Adrian lunged for the comm panel. We need to choke the well. Fill it with concrete, lead, anything. If one of the watchdog systems catches that signal. He never finished. The station convulsed. Alarms erupted. Decompression sirens howled. The floor tilted under their feet. Ice field shift, Gideon roared, grabbing a handrail. Crack is running right under us. Marcus, somehow still balanced, seized the hardened drive to which the decoded data had been copying. Adrian, the data. Get everything. We are leaving. The well, Adrian gasped, trying to stand as the floor leaned away under him. We have to close the damn well. Look at the instruments, Marcus snapped. Adrian did. The seismic epicenter was not deep in the lithosphere. It was directly below them, at lake depth. The temperature in the lake was climbing from -2 to boiling in seconds. It is sterilizing the reservoir, he whispered. Self-destruction, wiping the record. To the helicopter, Marcus shouted. They ran through the slanting corridor toward the pad. Walls split. Windows burst inward and let in 50 below air. Gideon led with his shoulder, smashing jammed doors open one by one. The station was dying. Bulkheads groaned under monstrous pressure from below. The ancient ice that had been a foundation for ages turned to slush and steam. In one corridor, the floor bulged and split. A jet of superheated vapor mixed with ice crystals slammed into Adrian and hurled him against the wall. Marcus, the same polished official Adrian had despised, caught him by the jacket and hauled him upright with surprising strength. Do not die now, he said. We were ordered to bring the data back. Through the fog of ruptured pipes and steam, the blue light returned. Only now it was no longer a beam. It split into scanning filaments that swept through the corridor as if searching. Everything they touched frosted over instantly and crumbled into powder, metal, plastic, composite. Move, Gideon bellowed, swinging a fire axe at the locked wheel of the outer hatch. If that thing touches us, we become museum pieces. The hatch yielded on the third strike. They stumbled into the freezing air of the antechamber and then onto the ice. The helicopter was already spinning up. Veteran polar pilots held the machine steady against the gale. Around the station, the ice field was breaking apart. Giant blocks lit from within by blue glow reared up like the teeth of some buried animal. Water erupted from the well in a pillar of steam hundreds of meters high. They threw themselves into the cargo bay along with the rest of the surviving expedition members. By some miracle, everyone who could run had made it out. Lift, Marcus shouted into the pilot headset. Straight up. The aircraft tore free of the ice at the instant the drilling platform and living module collapsed into the boiling abyss below. The steam geyser struck the helicopter belly and flung the heavy machine sideways, but the pilots wrestled it level. Adrian pressed himself to a porthole. Through the widening crack in the ice he saw, for a heartbeat, something colossal moving in the illuminated depths. Not geology, not anything natural. Vast mechanisms turned in the water beneath the kilometers of ice. Gears the size of cities, pistons pumping oceans. An ancient factory, awakened by the puncture of a needle, had resumed its conservation cycle. Whether it meant to hide itself again by melting the polar cap, or whether it meant to restore the climate to ancient parameters, he did not know. "We lost the sample," he muttered. Marcus, pale but almost exultant, raised the protected drive in his hand. "The sample, yes. The information, no. Coordinates, maps, technology, everything is here." "You do not understand," Adrian said, staring at him with horror. "We just started a timer. That machine is already rebuilding the atmosphere. You saw Mars on the map. They dried one world and flooded another." Marcus slid the drive into the inner pocket of his parka. "Then we have a year to learn how to control it, or a year to build arcs. Either way, the budget will be approved now." Below them, hidden beneath storm and steam, the old mechanism ground one more turn into the gears of history and began a new count. 3 months later. Moscow woke under rain instead of snow. Marcus woke 4 seconds before his alarm. An old military habit, fused into his nervous system somewhere between one war and the next, never allowed electronics the right of first speech. He lay in the dark, looking at the ceiling while a gray December dawn seeped through the curtains. Rain ticked against the glass. Rain in Moscow in the middle of December. He sat up and slid his feet into slippers. On the bedside table lay his phone and a leather notebook covered in his small, precise hand. He had been keeping it since the day he returned from Antarctica. Not a diary, a list. Names, tasks, deadlines, priorities. Paper was not online. Paper could not be hacked. Under today's date were 3 entries. Closed meeting, Academy of Sciences. Kremlin 1500. Call Adrian. The third line had no hour beside it. He had been postponing that call for a week. In the bathroom, he studied his face in the mirror. In 3 months, it had not so much aged as dried like clay left in summer heat. The cheekbones stood sharper. The lines beside his mouth had deepened. Sleep had stopped being an effective remedy for anything. He shaved with 3 exact movements, dressed in a dark gray suit, white shirt, black Oxfords, the uniform of a senior official, dependable as camouflage, and went to the kitchen. His apartment on Frunzenskaya Embankment had been empty for years. His wife had left 7 years earlier. There had been no children. Sometimes he thought that was merciful. A man carrying a flash drive with a death sentence for civilization in his breast pocket had little business having a family. He made coffee in a sieve, the one thing he could cook well. While he drank it, his assistant called to say the car was downstairs. Marcus rinsed the cup, slipped the notebook into his jacket, checked that the original drive remained sealed in the safe, and secured the working copy in a hardened case locked to his wrist by a titanium band. The black Urus waited under a film of rain. Serge Ward, his driver, sat behind the wheel trying and failing to suppress a yawn. Moscow slid past outside the windows, wet, unsettled, too warm for winter. The dashboard thermometer showed +10. Along the embankment the lawns were green, and that green seemed sickly, like a fever blush on the face of someone terminally ill. People walked hatless in light jackets. The expression on many faces was the same, pleasure mixed with unease. A warm winter felt good. But why? Marcus knew why. And because he knew, the city outside seemed like scenery for a play whose actors had not yet read the final act. The Academy building where the closed meeting would be held crouched behind the main presidium like an unlovely concrete box from the 70s, faced with darkened stone. Inside, past 3 security posts and 2 scanners, it felt like a bunker. A windowless conference room, a low-ceiling, fluorescent light that left nobody with shadows to hide in. 26 people were already seated around the long table when Marcus entered last. He took a seat along the wall instead of at the head, the old observer habit, seeing everyone while remaining just off the axis of attention. He knew every person in the room by name, biography, and clearance number. Geophysicists, climatologists, oceanographers, atmospheric modelers, 2 geneticists, 1 astrophysicist. None of them knew the whole picture. Each held a fragment, like the blind men in the parable, certain that the elephant was a rope or a pillar or a wall. The meeting was chaired by Edgar Rowe, a geophysicist in his 70s with a stone-cut face and pianist hands. He tapped a pencil against a water carafe. "Let us begin. Devices off, please. You all know the restrictions." 26 phones went face down on the table. First item, temperature anomaly dynamics for the last quarter. Victor. Victor Sloan rose from his chair. Thin, nervous, always tugging at the lobe of his left ear when agitated. Today the ear was already red. He brought up a global graph and a quiet, involuntary gasp moved around the room. "Mean global temperature has risen by 1.8 degrees in the last 3 months, he said. For comparison, the previous century gave us 1.2. What we are observing is acceleration beyond every current model. He switched slides. The Earth glowed red and orange. The strongest anomalies are concentrated in high latitudes. December in Murmansk is +6. Norilsk is +2. Verkhoyansk is -12 instead of the usual -40. Permafrost retreat is now faster than we can measure because monitoring stations are sinking into thawing ground. A dry, nervous laugh came from the far end of the table. Leon Drake, the permafrost specialist from Yakutia, was the one laughing. "It is not funny, Victor," he said. "Roads are liquefying. Foundations are cracking. Apartment blocks in Norilsk have settled 1/2 meter in 2 months. Give us another half year at this rate and the entire Arctic infrastructure dies." "I know," Victor said, "and that is not the worst part." The next slide showed Antarctica. The blue bloom under the ice was larger now than on the military images Marcus had first seen. It had spread into a chaos of broken bergs and open water. "The source of the anomaly cannot be identified by any natural model," Victor said. "The radiation is coherent. It matches no known geological or atmospheric process. Thermal output is on the order of 10 to the 16th watts. Roughly, the combined power generation of the entire human civilization." Silence settled so thickly that Marcus could hear the hum of the projector. "So we discard subglacial volcanism?" Edgar asked carefully. "Completely. A magmatic plume of this power would already have shattered the lithosphere, and the spectrum does not contain the infrared signature of magma." "Then what is it?" somebody asked. Victor fell silent. Then he looked at Marcus. Everyone looked at Marcus. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and let the room lean toward him. "The source is technological," he said, "older than 30 million years. No, I am not prepared to discuss whose technology or what exactly the word means in this context. That will be parceled out according to your specializations. For now, you need only the following. The heating process is controlled. It is global in scope. It will intensify, and we have partial but sufficient data to model its trajectory." He set a folder on the table. "I need working groups from each of you. Planning horizons, 1 year, 5 years, 50 years. 50 years, Leon Drake said, pushing to his feet. "Cities are drowning in thawed mud now. I need solutions for next quarter, not half a century." "Next quarter is for emergency ministries and builders," Marcus said without raising his voice. "You are here for something else, to understand the scale, and to help me explain that scale to the people who make decisions." His gaze moved around the room. "I want one brutally honest answer from every one of you. At the current rate, how much time does civilization, not humanity as a species but civilization, cities, logistics, agriculture, state institutions, have left in its present form?" Edgar answered after 8 measured seconds. "If the annual temperature continues to rise this way, Arctic infrastructure begins cascading collapse in 3 to 4 years. Sea level reaches values critical for coastal megacities in roughly 7. In 15 to 20 years, the map of the world changes beyond recognition. Define beyond recognition, Marcus said. Edgar put his glasses back on and met his eyes. London, Tokyo, New York, St. Petersburg underwater. Agricultural belts shift north by 1,000 kilometers. Equatorial regions become uninhabitable because of wet bulb heat. Hundreds of millions of refugees. Wars for water, soil, and power. I have spent 40 years in geophysics and never had to use the word apocalypse in a professional setting. I am running out of synonyms. It matched Marcus' own calculations, matched military analyses, matched what he had seen beneath the Antarctic ice. Thank you, he said. The materials will be distributed today. And one more thing. Among your staff, students, postgraduates, tell me the names of the difficult ones. The eccentrics, the people who ask the wrong questions in the right way. I will need minds that can think beyond textbooks. He left them in the cold fluorescent light and drove straight to the Kremlin. The ritual of entry was, as always, documents, frames, corridors with carpets and dim lamps, the smell of old polish and older power. Marcus had walked these halls dozens of times, but never carrying anything like this. Next to what lay in the case on his lap, all the other secrets of these rooms felt like children playing at espionage. The office was spare. A long green-topped table, 2 flags, a portrait on the wall. The president sat reading papers. Nearby, slightly back, sat the Security Council secretary, heavy-shouldered, silver at the temples, with the predatory stillness of a man who missed little and forgot nothing. Sit, the president said at last. Marcus opened the hardened laptop and turned the screen toward him. 3 months ago, a scientific expedition at North 4 detected a subglacial reservoir at a depth of roughly 3,700 meters beneath the Antarctic ice shield. During sample retrieval, the team activated an object of technological origin. Estimated age, more than 30 million years. Technological, the president repeated, whose? Unknown. The object appears to be part of a terraforming complex designed to regulate planetary climate. Its activation initiated the current warming. The cause is not industrial emissions, not solar variation, not any natural driver known to us. The president said nothing, not a muscle moved. Marcus brought up temperature graphs. In 3 months, mean global temperature has risen 1.8 degrees. If the process is not interrupted, 13 additional nodes are likely to activate within 12 to 14 months. After that, full climate reset takes between 1 and 3 years. Full reset, the president said. Define it. Loss of polar caps. Sea level rise of 60 to 70 meters. Global average temperature near 26 degrees. Atmospheric oxygen around 30%. Conditions approximately equivalent to the Paleogene greenhouse state. Show me. An interactive map filled the screen in blue. Northwestern Europe, sections of the West Siberian lowland, major river deltas, coastal cities. St. Petersburg, Marcus said. Gone, Rostov, Astrakhan-Arkhangelsk, Kaliningrad. He shifted the map again. In the Bay of Bengal, sea level has already risen 11 centimeters in 3 months, officially blamed on seasonal flooding. The Dutch are reinforcing pumps without understanding why their forecasts fail. South Florida is losing freshwater wells to salt intrusion. Meanwhile, the Sahara is seeing rainfall it has not seen in ages, but the water comes as destructive torrents. Southern Europe is entering drought. Atmospheric circulation is reorganizing. We cannot yet predict the final pattern. The president leaned back. You said if not interrupted, so it can be interrupted. Potentially. Among the decoded data is what we believe to be an emergency halt protocol. To execute it, we need physical access to one of the control nodes. The nearest accessible one is in western Siberia, depth 20 kilometers. The security secretary leaned forward. The Kola Superdeep reached 12 in 20 years. This does not require a new shaft, Marcus said. There is an existing access corridor. The entrance is buried beneath roughly 80 meters of collapsed strata. With proper equipment, we estimate 2 to 3 weeks to clear it. The room went still enough for the wall clock to sound accusatory. Evacuation, the president said, if stopping it fails. Coastal evacuation inside Russia is possible in theory. Tens of millions of people, years of work, entirely new infrastructure in higher regions, and even then the climate of those safe regions changes. But globally there is nowhere to run. There are no orbital habitats for civilians, no lunar cities, no Mars fallback. Humanity does not have a second home. The president went to the window. Beyond the glass, Moscow lay wet under December rain. Do other countries know? He asked without turning. They know something happened in Antarctica. Their satellites see the glow. The United States has asked through diplomatic channels about the status of our Antarctic programs. The British proposed a joint inspection under the Antarctic Treaty. China has quietly reinforced orbital coverage over the South Pole. They are adding 2 and 2. They do not yet know the arithmetic result. Your recommendation? Marcus had prepared for this question for 3 months. Silence for now. The nature of the object and the data represent a strategic advantage we cannot simply surrender. At the same time, we must prepare the ground for international coordination. Because if stopping the mechanism fails or only partially works, no single country will manage the transition. And because the data identifies 13 other nodes on foreign territory and in neutral waters, eventually someone else will find one. If they do it blindly, the consequences may be worse than what we are already facing. Imagine uncontrolled activation under Yellowstone. There would be no gradual warming. There would be a sudden release of energy with outcomes I prefer not to detail. The president returned to the table. Timeline for the Siberian node. If work begins immediately, physical access in 4 to 5 months. Then interpretation of the control interface and execution of the protocol. Total horizon, 6 to 8 months. What do you need? Authority, funding, personnel, and your personal backing. Generals will want a weapon. Industries will want technology. Scientists will want publication. Everyone will want a piece of a pie none of them understands. And do you understand it? The president asked. No, Marcus said, but I understand enough to know the pie is poisoned. My job is to find an antidote before someone takes too large a bite. A long look passed between them. Then the president opened a drawer, took out a sheet with the state seal, wrote 3 lines, signed it, and slid it across the table. Your mandate. Show it to anyone who resists you, and one more thing. The scientist Vale, every report describes him as brilliant and difficult. Bring him back. Without him you will fail. After the meeting, as the Oris moved through evening traffic, Marcus read the fresh intelligence summaries from the analytical department. Washington was the most visibly uneasy. Optical reconnaissance satellites had been retasked over Antarctica. Signals interception efforts against Russian polar stations had intensified, though the electromagnetic interference around the source made communications nearly unreadable within 200 kilometers. The Pentagon had requested emergency funding for an assessment of Southern Hemisphere geophysical threats. Beijing was quieter and more efficient. 3 icebreakers of the People Liberation Navy had moved south under the cover of a scientific expedition. On board were remote sensing specialists and a platoon of Marines. No questions, only action. Brussels remained trapped in process. An emergency environmental committee had debated anomalous climate data for 10 hours and concluded that a note of concern should be sent to every country active in Antarctica. Marcus stood at his apartment window with tea in his hand and looked down at the city. Nobody on the sidewalks below knew that under the South Pole an ancient machine had begun turning the planet toward greenhouse conditions. Nobody knew that in the pocket of his hanging jacket was a mandate allowing one man to shape the fate of civilization. Nobody knew that this man was drinking bad tea from a bag because he was too tired to brew it properly. He took out his phone and found Adrian's name. The conversation would be ugly. Adrian wanted the data published, the world's scientific community informed. Marcus wanted time, control, and fewer hands near things that could end the planet twice over. He called anyway. The line hissed with polar static before Adrian's voice arrived, hoarse and sleepy. "What time is it there?" Marcus asked. "Late enough for your soul to feel it. Pack your things, Adrian. You are coming back." "To Moscow." "To Siberia. We found an entrance to the transport tunnel. I need the man who can speak to what is at the bottom." "I did not speak to it, Marcus. I poked a switch and got lucky the switch did not take my arm off." "Exactly. That is why I need your arm." For the first time in weeks, Marcus heard him laugh. 8 months later, Novosibirsk had become a city of water and ferns. Rain had fallen for 4 unbroken weeks, not the fine cold mist of a Siberian spring, but a heavy tropical deluge that made asphalt steam like an iron pan outside Object 312, a buried bunker beneath Akademgorodok. The temperature held near 32 degrees. Birches that had never properly dropped their leaves stood knee-deep in rust-colored floodwater. The Ob had overflowed months earlier, swallowing lower districts. Those who had not evacuated lived on upper floors and moved by boat. Adrian stood before an external camera screen and felt his chest tighten. Beneath the swollen gray sky, institute buildings sat in water, and everywhere there was green. Not normal green, violent green, tropical green. It burst from cracks in pavement, climbed light poles, wrapped abandoned cars. Giant ferns, tree ferns taller than a person, plants that had no business existing in Siberia outside a fossil record, had returned. Spores locked in permafrost for millions of years had been given warmth and moisture, and answered like a long-delayed command. "Paleogen flora," Adrian muttered into his tea. He had lost 15 kilograms in the past months. His face had gone sharp, his eyes deeper, brighter, almost fevered. He slept 3 hours a night on a cot in the server room. Coffee had become tea because his heart had started skipping beats sometime during the 4th month of uninterrupted work. "Adrian," Marcus said from the doorway. "Moscow in 10 minutes." Adrian turned. Marcus had changed. He was still bald, still severe, but the tailored official had become something halfway between a field officer and a scientist. No suit now, only a plain operations coverall without insignia, a sidearm at his belt, 3 security passes on a lanyard, and the sallow face of a man who had lived too long under artificial light. The cold intelligence was still there, but it had been overlaid by fatigue and by something else, the stubbornness of a person carrying a weight he could not set down. Their relationship had changed too. It had not become warm. They were not built for warmth. But 8 months of shared recycled air, army rations, night shifts, and the slow funeral of the known world had turned mutual irritation into something closer to trench loyalty. "Which Moscow?" Adrian said, setting his mug down. "The one in the Kremlin or the one taking boats along Tverskaya?" "The dam on the river is holding," Marcus said, "for now." "And St. Petersburg?" Marcus did not answer immediately. "There is no city left to save," he said at last. "The museums were evacuated. Your daughter was moved with her university to Vologda in August. She is alive. I checked personally." Adrian nodded once. That, more than any speech, was the compact between them. Marcus kept those Adrian loved within the shrinking circle of safety. Adrian, in return, worked until the line between duty and obsession disappeared. They walked the fluorescent corridor toward the command hall. Object 312 had once been a reserve command bunker for the Siberian Military District, 40 meters of reinforced concrete built to survive a direct nuclear hit. Now it housed Center Delta, the structure created by Presidential Decree 3 months after the Antarctic catastrophe. Officially, it was an interagency task force for anomalous climate analysis. Unofficially, it was the last coherent hope anybody had. The control room was already full. Gideon Shaw sat in the front row, no longer just a drill master but chief of technical operations. The same hands that once handled drill pipe now managed arrays of monitors and sensor feeds. Beside him sat Lena Chase, a geneticist from Beijing with Russian roots, seconded under a secret bilateral protocol. Short-haired, expressionless, brilliant, she worked on the biological sections of the data, decoding the DNA archive stored in the dodecahedral processors. Colonel Nathan Reed, gray-haired and hard-eyed, oversaw security and military coordination. Nora Quinn, the programmer who had written the first stable decoding architecture for the third information layer, was half buried behind 3 screens, her dark hair in permanent disarray. Samir Dawood, a quiet electronics engineer with gold in his hands, stood near the main board, already soldering something that had not yet broken but would eventually try. A world map dominated the wall. The coastlines were wrong now. Red marked flooded territories, Bangladesh essentially gone, the Netherlands gone, a wide strip of coastal China. Yellow showed zones of abnormal heat, Siberia, Canada, Scandinavia. Blue marked new drought regions, southern Europe, the Middle East, the south of the United States. Sea level rise in 8 months, 17 meters. Mean global warming, 4.5 degrees. Marcus stood before the screen with his hands behind his back. Reports. Adrian, begin. Adrian stepped to the lectern with a tablet scarred and taped from too many relocations. In the past 3 weeks we completed the third information layer, he said. Quick refresher. The first layer was astrographic maps, orbits, logistics. The second was biological, genomes, ecosystem models, terraforming protocols. Dr. Chase has that. The third turned out to be the critical one. It is an instruction set. He brought up a 3-dimensional diagram that looked like a molecule, and a blueprint had been forced through each other. Instruction set for what? Reed asked. For control, for the Antarctic mechanism. We have been calling that mechanism the architect. It is active, and it is causing every climate change on this map. But the instruction set contains what I can only describe as a manual mode. Not just stop, perhaps redirect. Redirect, Marcus said. The architect is not a machine in the way we build machines. It is a feedback system. It reacts to input parameters. Right now it is running in automatic mode under the last loaded routine, conservation, erase traces, return the planet to Paleogene conditions. But that routine can be overwritten. So, with physical access to a control node, and that leads us here. He changed the slide. Siberia appeared with a pulsing point near the stony Tunguska River. Remember the site marker on the ancient map, the primary terraforming facility. Coordinates 62 north, 98 east, Tunguska. Tunguska, Reed repeated, as in the 1908 event. Exactly. Our working hypothesis is that Tunguska was not a meteor airburst. It was a partial activation of the local defensive perimeter. Something approached the node, perhaps a natural bolide, and the system fired. That would explain the lack of a crater and the pattern of devastation. Depth is still 20 kilometers, Marcus said. Adrian corrected. The permafrost is melting faster than our models predicted. The ground that stayed solid for ages is turning to marsh and sinkholes. 2 weeks ago our satellite picked up this. The image showed a perfect black circle in the green and brown chaos of the taiga. Diameter 400 meters, depth 620, vertical walls. Natural sinkholes do not look like that. We think the architect thawed the upper access level of the Siberian object and it opened, like a flower. You want to go down, Marcus said. It was not a question. We have to. In 4 months the sea rise reaches a critical threshold. The Gulf Stream has stalled. Europe is freezing even as the tropics boil. If we do nothing, the cascade becomes irreversible. What exactly do you intend to load into it? Lena asked. Adrian looked at her. The instruction set contains a field I have labeled Target Climatic Profile. Atmospheric composition, mean temperature, sea level, albedo, biospheric complexity. We can enter current baseline values, or rather the values from before our interference, and command stabilization. In plain language, Nora said from behind her screens, tell the machine to put things back. In plain language, yes. In reality, we understand maybe 10% of the instruction set. It is like handing an elementary school student the control panel of a nuclear plant. He can read the labels, maybe, but not the processes behind them. And yet you want to press a button, Lena said. I want to press a button, because the alternative is the death of civilization within a year. The preparation took 3 weeks, 3 weeks of hell. With the authority the president had signed into being, Marcus moved equipment, aircraft, specialists, and entire chains of supplies toward the coordinate. Roads in Siberia had washed out. Bridges had gone under. Rail lines sagged into thawed ground. Heavy helicopters shuttled cargo from Krasnoyarsk to a field camp pitched on the rim of the new shaft. Adrian spent hours standing at the edge, staring down. The hole breathed. Warm, damp air rose from its throat with a metallic taste that left a thin film on his skin. At night, a low hum climbed out of the darkness, not mechanical so much as organic, like the pulse of something very large and very much alive. Under floodlights, the walls revealed the same dodecahedral textures as the Antarctic processors, only now the pattern was vast, architectural, luminous. It knows we are here, Gideon said beside him one night, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette stuffed with whatever rough local herb had replaced tobacco in the markets. It knows, Adrian said, but it is not hostile. The Antarctic system tried to erase us. This one is waiting. Or it is bait. That too, Adrian said, but we do not have a better option. They began the descent at what passed for dawn, though dawn no longer meant much under the heavy veil of vapor that covered the region. The sun was only an orange bruise behind cloud. The descent team was small by design. Adrian, Marcus, Gideon, Samir, and Nora. They rode an industrial platform hanging on 4 titanium cables. Winches groaned. The platform swayed like a cradle over a grave. At 300 meters, the air turned warm. At 400, it was hot, and humidity climbed until each breath felt like drinking through the lungs. Oxygen normal, Samir reported, checking the gas analyzer. Actually elevated, 24%. Like the Carboniferous, Adrian said, that explains the ferns. The object is oxygenating the environment. It is breathing. At 550 meters, the shaft widened and the platform emerged into open space. All 5 of them fell silent. Below lay no cave but a cathedral. The dome soared a kilometer high. The walls were studded with glowing dodecahedral formations ranging from the size of a fist to the size of a bus. They grew from the rock, if rock it was, like crystal clusters, building fractal landscapes of impossible beauty. In the center of that buried sanctuary stood the object itself. It resembled no human machine. It looked like a tree. 100-meter trunk of dark, almost black material rose from the floor. Branches reached outward into the cavern walls and merged with them. Light ran through the trunk in waves from roots to crown and back again. Between the limbs stretched threads so fine they were almost invisible, vibrating in ultrasonic harmonies that made the air tremble. Mother engine, Nora whispered. Biomechanical interface, Adrian said, but his own voice shook. The trunk is a silicon-carbon superconductor. The branches are antennas. The threads look like a neural lattice. The Antarctic architect was only the hands. This is the brain. The platform touched the floor. Under their boots the surface gave slightly, warm and resilient, not stone but something more like skin. Each step sent out rings of faint blue light, as if they were walking across the surface of dark water. Marcus' hand drifted to his sidearm. "Take your hand off the weapon," Adrian said without looking back. "We are not here to fight." "I am always ready for both possibilities," Marcus said, but he did remove it. At the base of the tree, among braided root structures, lay a smooth oval platform roughly 5 meters across. Its surface was embossed with spirals, nodes, and raised symbols. Adrian recognized patterns from the decoded instruction layer at once. "The console," he said. "Input interface. Nora set up." She opened a protected case and lifted out the modified quantum computer the Delta engineers had built from fragments of the third layer specifications. It was the size of a suitcase, bristling with sensors and cable bundles, a crude human attempt at a translator between 20th century silicon logic and whatever this buried organism machine used for thought. Nora worked with shaking fingers, while Samir lit the contacts with his headlamp. "Handshake initiated," she said. "We have response. It is greeting us." "Greeting," Marcus repeated. "That or demanding identification, sending our answer now." She keyed in the mathematical response Adrian had constructed from the instruction layer: pi, Planck constant, gravitational constant, the universal language of ratios. The tree responded. White light ran up the trunk. The threads between the branches vibrated and emitted a chord, not mechanical noise but something musical, sorrowful, and majestic at once. The sound filled the cavern and resonated in their bones. "Unlocked," Nora breathed. "There is a menu. God, there are hundreds of functions: atmosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere, biosphere. There is even a function that translates roughly as seeding, as in creating new biological lines." "Find stabilization," Adrian said. "Found a homeostasis block. Manual calibration submenu. It wants target parameters." Adrian pulled out the tablet on which he had written the pre-anomaly values: mean temperature, carbon dioxide concentration, ocean level, albedo, oxygen range, rainfall distribution. Nora entered each one while the machine translated the numbers into the alien structure. Every accepted block made the tree flash in acknowledgement. "Last field," she said, "biosphere index. Options are preserve current biota, overwrite from template, or replace." Adrian froze. "Overwrite from template," Nora repeated softly. "The description points to a return to Paleogene biota. Giant insects, archaic mammals, full rollback." Marcus said, very quietly, "Wait." Everyone turned. He stood with his arms folded, face unreadable. "What if we do not preserve it?" he said. "What if we choose replace?" "You cannot be serious," Adrian said. "I am entirely serious. Humanity has lost a third of its coastal infrastructure in 8 months, trillions in damage, millions of refugees, political breakdown, wars for resources. You want to put everything back and pretend we learned nothing. Maybe this is a chance to reset properly, not to restore the old parameters but to choose better ones. A controlled climate, a managed biosphere, green the deserts, turn Siberia into the breadbasket of the planet. Stop pretending the old system was sacred." "We have no right," Adrian said. "We barely understand what we are touching." "We understand enough to read the labels." 10%. 10% is not enough to redesign the world. 90% of human history has been made by people acting with less than 10% information, Marcus said. "I am not the villain here. I am the man who has to decide whether 7 billion people live or die." "And I am telling you that the choice is false," Adrian said. "We do not get to rewrite the planet in our own image. Not now, not like this. We preserve what exists. We study this carefully, slowly, like a textbook, not a weapon, not a miracle button. We do not even know who built it or why. For all we know, someone is watching. Maybe this whole thing is a test. Test of what? Marcus asked. Maturity. Give a child a box of matches and see whether he burns down the house or learns how to make fire without destroying everything around him. For a long moment Marcus only looked at him. Then he nodded once. Preserve current biota, he said to Nora. Restore pre-anomaly stabilization profile. Nora entered the final line. Confirmation required, she said. The system wants a biometric operator key, physical contact. Adrian looked at the oval platform. The symbols were pulsing now, not randomly, but with the steady rhythm of invitation. I will do it, he said, and stepped forward. Marcus caught his name. We do not know what happens next. Adrian turned. His face looked older than it had a year earlier, but calm. I spent 13 years finding this point on the map. I traded my daughter's childhood for this. If someone has to take the risk, then let obsession pay the bill. He moved to the center of the platform. Light burst under his boots. Warmth struck up through his body, rising like a tide. He felt himself being read, not by X-rays or ultrasound, but by something deeper, as if every cell were becoming transparent to an intelligence older than species. It did not hurt. It was almost intimate. He laid his palm on the central spiral, the shape that resembled a double helix. The world ignited. He did not see with his eyes now. He saw with everything. The earth hung beneath him, blue and cloud-wrapped. Then the view peeled backward across time. 34 million years fell away. The polar ice vanished. Antarctica rotated into a greener place under a warmer geometry of continents. At the edge of perception, he sensed the makers of the machine, not human, not remotely humanoid, but something for which human language had never prepared a container. They shut down the last terminal, left the world behind, and moved on to other stars, other projects. They had not died here. They had simply departed, leaving Earth as a seeded laboratory intended to develop on its own over geological time. His hand locked to the surface. He tried to shout to Marcus, who was only steps away in the buried cavern, but no sound crossed the narrowing gap between intention and flesh. Blue light rushed through him, through eyelids, skull, thought, and then his body was somewhere below and his awareness was elsewhere entirely. Antarctica first. No ice, no white silence, only forests and wet heat from coast to inland uplands, a continuous dark green pelt over the land, southern beaches, araucarias lifting tiered arms over the understory, tree ferns uncurling 10-meter fronds in thick mossed air. Insects droned in a continuous choir that made the atmosphere tremble. A brown river crossed a marsh plain, and on its bank stood a stocky marsupial herbivore the size of a large pig, rooting in the mud with blunt shovel teeth while two young copies nosed among the reeds nearby. When it lifted its head, for one impossible instant Adrian recoiled, certain it was looking at him. But it was only following the shadow of a cloud. The vision pulled him north through the narrow sea that would one day become the Drake Passage. South America rose green and heavy beneath him. Patagonia was no wind-flayed emptiness but a belt of subtropical forest. On a clearing moved three huge mammals, rhino-sized, low-slung, thick-limbed, their jaws stripping leaves from shrubs while a constant basso rumble came from deep in their chests. Astropothers, his stunned mind supplied from old paleontology plates, thunder beasts of a vanished line. One turned, and its short muscular proboscis searched the air like a blind finger. Continents drifted beneath him as if he were looking at a puzzle not yet fully assembled. The Atlantic was narrower. India was already welded into Asia, and the young Himalayas rose lower and greener than any human had seen them. Tethys still breathed where the Mediterranean basin would one day open. The water there was shallow and hot and crowded with life. He passed over Europe buried in subtropical forest, then over green Greenland, where metasequoia and swamp cypress covered the island from coast to coast, and little dawn horses on many-toed feet flickered through the mist. One predator crouched at a tree line, some early flesh eater not yet fully cat or dog, all potential and hunger. North America unfolded with volcanic teeth along the Pacific margin, and inland seas flooding the center of the continent. Brontothir stood in mangrove shallows and tore at shoots with wet gray folds of skin shining in the humid light. Near them, a giant flightless predatory bird ripped larvae from a rotten trunk with a hooked beak and raised a yellow eye toward the sky. And again, Adrian felt the irrational certainty that he had been noticed by something that had died before his species was born. The air of that world was thick and sweet. More oxygen, more rot, more bloom. No true seasons, only slight modulations around an endless late spring. Everything flowered, everything steamed, everything lived as if under instructions precise enough to remove waste, chance, and all honest wilderness. Then he saw the first mechanism. It stood on the coast of East Africa within a perfect circle 3 kilometers wide where forests simply did not grow. No fire scar, no clearing. The trees halted at the boundary as if denied permission to exist within. Inside lay cropped grass of exact height and exact density. At the center rose a dodecahedral structure about 15 meters across, partly above ground, mostly buried. Its faces pulsed with the same blue light as the Antarctic core, softer here, like an access point rather than a heart. A relay, a local node. He lifted higher, and then he saw all of them. 14 blue filaments rose from the planet, fine as threads, spanning from pole to pole in a geometry more crystalline than geographic. One in Antarctica, one in Siberia, one where Iceland would someday stand above the sea, one in the oceanic basin that would eventually become the Mariana Trench, one beneath the Tibetan Plateau, one below the ground tourists would someday call Yellowstone without understanding what slept there. 14 nodes exchanging pulses, correcting variables, tuning atmosphere, hydrosphere, magnetic field, ocean currents, methane release, albedo. Not with gross interventions, but with the fine touch of a gardener trimming a vine by a quarter inch. A greenhouse world, every parameter measured, every process guided, every species permitted because the system allowed it. And then he saw the transport. Not the red lines from the decoded map, but the craft themselves, thin silver capsules rising from equatorial nodes on lines that ran straight beyond the atmosphere to orbital structures so delicate they were almost invisible. Elevators, traffic, harvest. Containers moved up from the surface full. They returned empty. Earth was not just a garden, it was a farm. The realization struck with more force than any fear. All this beauty, all this abundance, all this balance existed because it produced something. Biomass, genetic novelty, atmospheric chemistry, data, life itself as crop. The ancient builders had seeded the world, tuned it, let it run, and gathered whatever it made. The image shuddered. He was falling back through light and heat, and the impossible sweetness of that old air. The last thing he saw was an astropother on a South American clearing lifting its short trunk toward the sky and sounding a low, lonely call, not because it understood the farm beneath its feet, but because it felt some pattern shift in the field of things. Air slammed into his lungs. He was back on the platform in the Siberian cavern, hand tearing free of the glowing spiral. He sagged, caught by Gideon and then by Marcus. Adrian, Gideon said, "You stopped breathing for 3 minutes." "I saw it," Adrian rasped. "I saw the whole network, all 14 nodes, the world they built, the world they wanted." "What world?" Marcus asked, crouching beside him. "A farm," Adrian said. "A beautiful, careful, monstrous farm. They left it 34 million years ago and put it into storage. When we drilled Antarctica, the automatic system read the breach as the start of a new cycle." He looked at his right palm. Where the surface had touched him, a fine web of lines had been burned or grown into the skin, like a map. Already it was fading. Then memory aligned with the tiny notation he had glimpsed inside the system logs during contact. Project Seedfall, Status active, observation passive, completion criterion, contact with interface by intelligent native species. He understood at once. Not a test, a threshold, a lock meant to open only when one of the seeded species became capable of finding the machine, reading the instructions, and making a choice. The tree changed color. Dark black gave way to silver. New patterns flowed along its trunk and branches, more intricate than before. Accepted, Nora said, staring at her display. Stabilization protocol initiated. Estimated return to target parameters 18 months. 18 months of chaos, Marcus said. Adrian shook his head. 18 months of adaptation. If the shift were instant, ecosystems would die of shock. The machine knows more variables than we do. And after that, Marcus asked. Adrian looked up toward the faint circle of sky far above the shaft. After that, we do the hardest thing. We tell the world the truth. They rose in silence. Halfway up, with the dodecahedral glow dimming as the system settled into sleep mode, Marcus took the old data drive from his pocket and rolled it between his fingers. When we ran from North 4, he said, I did not grab this for science. I thought about promotion, about being the man who brought his country the technology of gods. Now all I can think is that below us lies a machine that can repair in 18 months what we spent centuries destroying. And my first instinct was still to keep it from everyone else. For the first time in all those months, his smile was not cynical. It was tired and almost human. Maybe your test was never for one person, he said. Maybe it is for all of us. If we hide this, if we weaponize it, if we use it only for ourselves, then we fail. You are surprising me, Adrian said. I am surprising myself. 8 months underground with scientists appears to be infectious. So not instant declassification, Adrian said. Not everything at once. No, but a United Nations conference. Joint oversight. Some form of shared custody. I will recommend it. They may still remove me from office for becoming sentimental. If so, perhaps retirement will finally leave me time to learn an alien language. The platform reached the surface. Fresh, damp Siberian air struck their faces. For the first time in a month, the clouds had broken. Between the crowns of giant ferns, evening sky showed through, bruised gold and crimson. Gideon stepped onto solid ground first, stretched his back and squinted upward. Pretty, he said. The clouds are opening. Adrian remained at the rim of the shaft for a moment and listened to the underground hum fade. Far below, the silver tree had gone quiet, spending its power not on spectacle but on the delicate labor of adjusting a world back toward habitability, carefully, almost tenderly, like a surgeon pulling a torn seam closed with patient stitches. Then the satellite phone at his belt rang. For 8 months, interference had made most long-distance communication a gamble. Now the line was suddenly clean enough to break his heart. Dad, said a voice crackling with distance. Clara. Dad, are you alive? Alive, he said, and his own voice shook. I am alive. I think I finally finished. Finished what? He looked at the shaft, at the ferns, at Marcus already speaking into a secure line to Moscow, at Gideon smoking in silence, at Nora and Samir sitting on the edge of the platform with their legs hanging like children over a pond. The most important work of my life, he said. Clara, I am coming home, really home this time. Do you promise? 13 years of broken promises stood between the question and the answer. But now the great shaft had been drilled. The capsule had been opened. The right button had been pressed. What remained was not another absence at the end of the world, but the long, patient work of decoding an inheritance, work that could be done from a laboratory near his daughter, near an ordinary life. I promise, he said, and for the first time in 13 years, he knew he would keep that promise. Night rose clear over Siberia. Stars brightened above the receding haze, sharp and indifferent. Somewhere among them, very far away, The builders of the architect continued whatever work beings like that did among the stars. Perhaps they knew. Perhaps they did not. Perhaps the whole point had always been the waiting. Beneath the earth, the old machine whispered a final message in the code of dodecahedrons. It passed through branch antennas, through the ionosphere, through vacuum, using dimensions human physics had not yet learned to name. The message was short. Object 3. Solar System, third planet, native intelligent species, interface contact confirmed, operator decision stabilization preservation, recommendation shift project seedfall from observation mode to contact mode, awaiting response. From very far away, an answer came back. Yes,